All right, we are back on the record in the 2024 Reliability Technical Conference. We have a new panel here today, and I have a script to read that is not on top, so I won't read it. and we'll actually go straight into and allow everybody to introduce themselves. Just take about 30 seconds and 30 seconds to a minute and say who you are and where you're from. Mr. Lauby. If you press the button, the little red light comes on.
Thank you. I'm an engineer, so I don't know how to operate that. So I'm Mark Lauby, North American Electric Reliability Corporation Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Andrew French, Chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission, also representing all the state regulators within the Southwest Power Pool and our participation in resource adequacy. Want to just thank the Commission for having me as hopefully a representative of all the states and a token of the good work that the FERC has done to start inviting the state regulators in and collaborate on a number of fronts, and I hope this is a continuation of that, and I appreciate it.
Hello, Chairman and Commissioners. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about this important topic. My name is Aftab Khan. I am the Executive Vice President of Operations, Planning, and Security at the PJM Interconnection. I have responsibility for 24/7 control room operations, planning the long-term regional transmission, and responsible for cyber and physical security of the PJM operations.
Thank you, Commission. My name is Clay Rikard. I am Vice President of System Planning for Southern Company. I lead the generation and transmission planning for our 3 retail electric subsidiaries in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. My comments today will be centered around our state-regulated, vertically integrated market structure. But before I give up the microphone, I do want to say thank you for your kind words this morning around Helene. It was the most destructive storm in the history of Georgia Power. We had over 1,000 miles of wire, 2,000 transformers, and 8,300 poles that need to be repaired or replaced. And I'm so proud and thankful for our line workers that were able to restore that service. We had, I think, 1.3 million customers impacted, and 95% were restored in less than 10 days. So very thankful to them and also the volunteers that came in from around the country. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Cristy, Sanada, and I am Director of California Regulatory Affairs at the California Independent System Operator. In California, our long-term planning processes are highly coordinated with California state energy agencies and our local regulatory authorities, and so in my role, I'm largely responsible for shepherding that coordination. I really look forward to the discussion today, and thank you again for having me here.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Donna Walker, and I'm the President and CEO of Hoosier Energy Electric Cooperative. I'm also here on behalf of the more than 800 members of the NRECA, who are also non-for-profit electric cooperatives serving the United States. And so appreciate the opportunity to be here and share perspective with you this morning.
Good morning. My name is Josh Levy. I'm the president of the Data Center Coalition. We are a membership organization for the U.S. data center industry. Our members are leading data center owners, operators who provide the digital infrastructure that enables the applications and data center services that support the modern economy, including cloud computing and artificial intelligence. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you all for those comments. This panel, we're focused on resource adequacy and expected load growth. And I'm glad that we have both NERC and commissioners being represented at the table, because my question is about collaboration there. I know that NERC mentioned in its written comments that there's this need for close, intense collaboration with the states. And when it comes to respecting the state's jurisdictional power when it comes to resource adequacy, what does that collaboration look like? And I'll start with you, Mr. Lauby.
Thank you for the question. And of course, you heard about the math, and there's another equation I keep in my head, which is capacity gives you generation or energy and essential reliability services. And as we start building capacity, we have to make sure that we have those components in our mind. And so I think it's really the partnership has got to be around getting to a point of understanding what is the design basis of this system of the future. What does it look like? And we have been so very comfortable about 1 in 10. We've used that since 1947. Well, actually 68 when PGM said, by gosh, we're going to use that as a result of the 65 blackout. And it's really held us well. Very, very rarely did you see generation lower than demand. And we're starting to see that now as we integrate in weather-related or weather-dependent resources, as we have an interconnected gas and electric system and how they work together. So that partnership really needs to come down to, well, what is that design basis going to look like? You heard Mr. George talk a little bit about this. Planners look at 1 in 10 and say, this is how much I'm going to build to get to that 1 in 10. You use forced outage rates. They use random failures of large plants, and then we just stack them. We only care about peaks. Now we have to work with the states around, well, what does that look like when you have variable generation, where wind isn't blowing for, a long period of time? June 6th of last year, where we had, 200 megawatts being generated by 60,000 megawatts of wind. So how do we design that system? NERC has been working with actually industry and states, and it was an international effort with the National Academy of Engineering. Had a one-day meeting. FERC was there as well, and everybody talked about what they were doing as what needs to be done, and that included our colleagues in the states. And so we're going to be setting in our long-term reliability assessment certain design bases, and saying if you are higher than this, you're risky. If you're in the middle there, then you're medium, and then we look at those that are low risk. We're looking at expected unserved energy, loss of load hours, as well as the 1 in 10, so we can get to those impacts. And so working with our state colleagues, getting an agreement on that design basis, and I think will help us a great deal, because as we start changing the generation, we look at the load, we look at what are the needs of transmission, that all comes down to getting to those design bases.
Thank you. Chair French, you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, I'll just say coordination between state and federal governments is, it's absolutely paramount on all of these issues that FERC deals with. I mean, obviously in transmission planning, but also on resource adequacy. We have areas of shared responsibility. There are areas within the bulk power system where NERC and FERC are responsible for setting resource adequacy requirements. And that is federally jurisdictional, and the states need to respond. So I think the primary area where I would say we have coordinated very well is in things like setting accreditation policies and setting those ultimate resource adequacy requirements, things like planning reserve margins. These are fuel neutral policies. They are data-driven policies that tell us what an appropriate level of reliability might be and how we might value different resources based on the attributes they provide to the system. But it ultimately leaves to the state what resources they will implement to achieve those resource adequacy requirements. So I think that's a very good collaborative method we set up. I will also say I am in a little bit of a unique position within the Southwest Power Pool. The states have varying levels of participation within all the different RTOs. Within the Southwest Power Pool, though, our regional state committee is actually written into the tariff with primary responsibility for resource adequacy. So for things like planning reserve margin or accreditation of resources, as our regional state committee sets those policies, that's what's filed with FERC for approval. And so let me just give you one example of good collaboration between us and our RTO that helped inform the states on making a policy, and that was we recently set a new winter planning reserve margin where we did not have one before, and we increased our summer planning reserve margin. And those were very data-driven analyses, and they were informed by things like an EUE standard. We looked at varying levels of what a planning reserve margin could be, and we could see that even a small shift downward in a planning reserve margin could more than double the expected unserved energy. And that data all was very helpful to the state regulators in understanding where we should recommend those things be set. So there is a lot of room for collaboration and coordination to receive information from NERC and from the RTOs on how we set resource adequacy policies.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about load. There's been a lot said today, and at our oversight hearing on the Hill about data centers, AI, quantum computing, all of these new technologies that are coming onto the system, putting pressure on the system. I want to know from you all, and we can start with Mr. Rikard from Southern Company. What is driving this load in your view, and what are the reliability services that you think FERC needs to focus on when it comes to servicing this load? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. You know, the Southeast has become the epicenter for economic development. Georgia Power is in, obviously, the state of Georgia, which has been ranked #1 for economic development for the last 11 years. I think that is a result of a supportive state that is focused on economic development and a sound, constructive regulatory environment. And because of that, we're seeing historic growth, speed, and scale. To put it in perspective for you, we're already the nation's largest, one of the largest electric providers. We have enough load in our pipeline right now to double the size of our company in the next 10 years. It is being driven, yes, by data centers. We also have solar panel manufacturing, battery manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, electrification in our territory. And so I love the conversation we just had, and I appreciate what Mr. Lauby said about resource adequacy. It is a good tool, planning reserve margin, when calculated correctly. But it really needs to be considered along with energy adequacy, actual reserve margin, and I want to use your term, Commissioner, from earlier, I really appreciate it, insurance or resilience. You know, when we calculate planning reserve margin, we have to look at all the risks to our customers, whether it's weather, unit outage, load forecasts. We look at seasonal. We have winter and summer target reserve margins. We've had that for many years now. But then we quantify the cost to our customer to mitigate that risk versus the cost of interrupting their service. And what that results in is an economically optimum target reserve margin for our customers, balancing reliability and affordability. But that's just a planning reserve margin. We have an obligation to serve in our territory. And so we actually measure actual reserve margin, which means each year we go and either build or procure the necessary firm dispatchable capacity and the associated transmission to deliver it and the fuel to get there to make sure we hit that target. And then third, this was also mentioned by my fellow panelists, energy adequacy is becoming a very important issue. With less firm dispatchable resources and more intermittent resources, we have to go through a very in-depth hourly exercise to assess the load, but also can I get fuel to those resources? What is the volatility of the solar, and what is the limitations on the battery storage? And by doing that, I can ensure that all customers get all their energy needs in every hour. And finally, to resilience, if I could, sorry, I'll be quick, the insurance. You're right, there's not necessarily a signal sometimes for that in these markets. In our regulatory construct, we have the advantage of valuing that insurance and going to our state commission saying this is a prudent investment to make because planning reserve margin only accounts for normal conditions. Resilience accounts for abnormal conditions like extreme weather events. And so because of that state regulatory construct, we've been able to winterize our gas fleet. We've been able to buy firm fuel transportation and also invest in gas storage. And because of that, have an economic system, and we haven't shed load since 1977.
All right. I can't bring this issue up without going to Mr. Levi. Would you like to weigh in?
I would, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate that opportunity here. Data centers have become central to our increasingly digitized economy. Everything from the way we work and learn how we buy groceries, bank, and even access medical care now occurs online. We're experiencing widespread adoption of cloud services by individuals, businesses, and government agencies, and other organizations. And the proliferation of connected devices, I look around the room, I see tablets, I see watches, we have a lot of remote participants. The scaling of advanced technologies like generative AI, which McKinsey now tells us they're anticipating between $2.6 and $4.4 trillion in economic value globally by 2030, are all driving this. Importantly, data center load growth reflects the demands and the dynamic growth of our customers and end users. Banks, advanced manufacturers, Fortune 500 companies, small and home-based businesses, technology startups, airlines, schools, government agencies, households, individuals, and so many others are storing data at our facilities and relying on the ability to do so and to access that data. The growth drivers are real and they are expanding. JLL tells us, the real estate firm, that they anticipate that over the next 5 years we will see twice as much data generated as we saw over the past 10 years. So it's very much compressed. Deloitte tells us on average the U.S. households now have 21 connected devices. I will tell you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if I'm ashamed or proud. We have 50 in my household. I have 2 teenagers. When you think about the vacuums and the doorbells and the cameras and the watches and the tablets, I mean, we're just really driving a lot of that connectivity and demand within our households.
I was going to see that 21 and raise you.
Yeah, we have now 5.4 billion people, about 2/3 of the global population online. 45% of that population came online since 2018. And Mr. Chairman, 1/3 of that population isn't even online yet. So we're anticipating that they're going to want to be online and access services. Average monthly household broadband consumption has effectively doubled in the past 5 years, just the average household amount of data consumed. And we're told that the global monthly average use per smartphone is going to double in the next 5 years as everybody's device does more things. McKinsey now estimates in the aggregate that we're looking for data center demand in the U.S. to grow from 25 gigawatts this year to 80 gigawatts by 2030, which is a very significant growth, and we're very much seeing that as real. The issues raised in the earlier panel we think are of critical concern. We provide essential infrastructure and services, and we rely on uninterrupted power for our operations and our customers' needs. And that includes meeting the demands of a growing economy and supporting the essential functions that underpin the nation's security and resilience. So when you think about the number of people online, the number of devices, you think about how ubiquitous. We now access data on airplanes and buses and cars, and then we're doing it in our sleep. We want to know our sleep patterns. We want to make sure we have REM. I would tell you we're just seeing tremendous demand, and that's why the industry is responding and trying to build out this capacity.
All right. I really wanted to get to the ISO and RTO. Good to see you. Again, I'm going to allow time for my colleagues to jump in, and maybe we'll have a follow-up round. Mr. Cristy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to recognize we gave great kudos to the Southern utilities today, particularly the large ones we all know about, Florida Power and Light, Duke, Southern's done a fabulous job in getting power restored after the 2 hurricanes. I want to recognize Donna Walker's here from NERC, National Rural Co-ops, and they also have had a lot of rural co-ops who were impacted and don't have the same resources, but they've been out there too, working hard to get the power restored to their rural customers, and that's what co-ops are all about, is their customers, which is what's so admirable. So I want to give the kudos to the co-ops as well on that. I want to direct my question. It's a 2-part question. Actually, it's the same question, but to 2 different people. The 2 multi-state RTOs are represented here today. We have Mr. Kahn from PJM and Chairman French of Kansas is fully versed on the SPP resource adequacy. He would qualify as an expert witness in a proceeding. But I want to ask you, the contrast is really when it comes to generating resources and how we get the generating resources. So I'm going to start with Mr. Kahn and then ask Chairman French to point out SPP's different aspect on that. So Mr. Kahn, we know we have a problem in PJM. I said this morning, PJM's close to my heart and my monthly power bill as a Virginian. But it's the biggest RTO in the country, in the world actually, by load served. So it's extraordinarily important, and unlike SPP, PJM tries to do it through a mandatory capacity market. And I'm going to ask you whether you think it's what PJM is. You just postponed the next BRA. We had the 7x increase in capacity costs last summer, but the most scary thing, and I'm going to give all the credit to Manu Astana, and they've been very upfront about what's happening in PJM. You're looking at losing 50 to 60 gigawatts of mostly dispatchable resources. Manu's been very upfront about that. PJM has been very upfront about that. And it's just, in your testimony, you say you're going to be looking at a power a shortfall by 2030. What is the answer? What does PJM see as reversing this course we're on in PJM, where we're just looking at potentially catastrophic consequences. I mean, that's not melodrama. It's where we're heading. And what does PJM think has to be done to, first of all, stop the cascading retirements, which we're seeing in PJM, but also get the resources online that we're going to have?
So thank you, Commissioner Cristy. That is the number one thing that keeps us up at night at PJM. And you know, we had a couple years back, I think it was early last year, we issued a report called the 4R report, Resource Retirement, Replacement, and Risk. And
very
we kind of
forthright.
highlighted this risk, some of the things that you've talked about. And it's a concern that we started to see that generation retirements were outpacing generation additions. At that time, we were looking at load growth, but even as we fast forward today from when we did that report, load growth is accelerated, largely due to data centers. So our approach is, I would say, twofold. So first, obviously, we need to do everything we can within PJM, and that is adapt our markets approach and adapt our planning approach, right? On the planning side, it's interconnections. We're making great progress on reforms to get new resources through the interconnection process. We're actually announced to our stakeholders we want to further accelerate that, and you'll be hearing more about that, of allowing resources that could support our near-term resource adequacy concern into the cycle transition process we're in right now. And as you said, we've kind of delayed a capacity market auction here. Well, part of that is to ensure that we are adapting any needed changes to make those markets as effective as possible to attract resources. I think what we have seen with the high capacity market prices recently has been some encouraging feedback. Now, time will tell what will actually get built to support our needs, but we are receiving some positive signals from the market in terms of the price signal that we sent. Now, whether that's enough or not, that's what time will tell, but we're doing everything we can. And then I think the other part is we're very active. We're in 13 states. We're very active with policymakers about ensuring that policies include resource adequacy and other reliability aspects in what they're developing.
Well, let me just follow up really quick on that, because Paul McGlynn spoke to the Markets and Reliability Committee last month, and he gave some numbers, which I thought were pretty astounding. He says, you've actually, in terms of the queue, PJM has already approved 37 gigawatts for interconnection agreements, and it hasn't been built. And he further said that of the 37 gigawatts that have been approved for interconnection, that they're already through the queue. The queue's not the problem. Only 5 gigawatts of that 37 represents combined cycle gas, which is the only dispatchable resource that anyone is attempting to build in PJM. So the 37 gigawatts of approved resources are not even 37 gigawatts. They're mostly intermittent, and the capacity values are not anywhere near 37 gigawatts. So it doesn't look like the queue's a problem, and it looks like the resources are not coming forward either because they can't get financing or the markets are not producing financing. I mean,
yeah, and so there's a little bit of nuance to what's through the queue and what's in the current queue, because those are obviously resources that entered the queue or went through the queue a few years back, right? I think what we're trying to create now, and as I mentioned, we're going to be proposing a change to our transition cycle process to open that up for resources that, based on what's going on now with market price signals, could support us with the right reliability attributes and in the time frame that we need to address resource adequacy concerns. That's something we're going to fast track because time is of the essence here on this issue. But we believe that could create an opportunity for resources, to your point, that could support resource adequacy, could get through our queue faster.
Okay. So, Chairman French, you don't have a capacity market in SPP. How do you do it?
Yeah. So it's all about setting good resource adequacy requirements, planning reserve margins, and using good, sound accreditation of resources. SPP has gone through and is still continuing to pursue new accreditation. Hopefully we'll have that in place soon. And that is sending a signal of what we need from generators and what generators we need in the future. I think I can say that there is not a single pending coal retirement in SPP right now, and that is a result of strong resource adequacy requirements and accreditation requirements. That they are fuel neutral, but frankly, there is no way to meet that and also retire everything in your fleet. People know that they have to maintain everything they have right now until they can get new things online. So,
Well, I assume all those coal units are in rate base.
yeah.
That's why they're staying open, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, we're vertically integrated utilities, and they're unless they have something else that they could bring online economically, they will stay open. But that does bring us to how they're going to transition to new resources. Or, I mean, frankly, just having what you have isn't going to be enough when we look at the demand growth that's coming. So to your point of how we add things and what we're doing with the queue, I do want to mention, we've added a lot of resource adequacy requirements in the last few years, and we get legitimate concerns from our load-serving entities about, look, you're putting a lot on us, but when we look at this, 5-year GIQ, there's no pathway to compliance. I mean, how do we actually build what you're telling us we need to build? And so, I mean, I do want to point out that is an area that's an issue. We're in the same position where we have many gigawatts that are actually through the queue, but they aren't being built for supply chain reasons or siting issues. But the queue, it's a new queue now. It's still long. So if you wanted to bring a new gas plant online, right, you're still in a 4 or 5 year process, probably at best. And so that is a challenge, and hopefully something we can address.
Thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, panel. First, Southern and NRECA, just want to say, appreciate all the efforts you have undertaken to recover from the storms, and it's great to have you here, and great to hear how quickly you've been able to restore power. Just a quick observation. I think this panel is really interesting because we have, I think, all of the models represented here. And just a quick observation is that regardless of the model, it seems like you're all kind of looking at this equation the same way, which is, I think, good. And the thing that I'm excited about is this accrediting capacity. I think that's really smart. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think it's directionally what I'm hearing is all similar, and I think that's worth noting, because when we think about the future, systems like that, methods like that, they're fuel neutral. They are allow whatever resource can provide the attribute to provide reliability, to provide it. And they reward based on what you can provide. And I think that's really good, and that's really smart, and that's how we keep our thumb off the scale and get the most efficient set of resources in the mix. The other thing that I hear loud and clear from this panel is there's a lot of demand, and we've talked a lot about demand, and that takes me to my first question. Fundamentally, I think load growth is economic growth, and that's a good problem to have. But meeting that challenge is not easy. It's not. It doesn't happen by accident. And so, the first question I have is just, entering this chat, so to speak. A year ago, we were all surprised. We said, "Wow, there's so much demand. We can't possibly do this level of demand." And then, more recently, I have been hearing how much of this is real. And so, I think a question I have for whoever wants to take it is, how are you, when you look at what's coming onto the system in your region, getting the certainty on whether or not that demand is real, and so that we don't have another situation where we have the opposite of the interconnection queue, where there's a lot of speculation and it makes it difficult to plan. That's the first one, and then friends from California, got a quick one for you, if there's time, where California, a few years ago, I feel like at this conference, perhaps there was a lot of consternation about reliability challenges in California, and then this summer, if you read the trade press, California seemed to be able to meet the summer peak demand, and I think it's because you deployed storage very rapidly. And so my question is, how did you do it, and is what you did replicable? So, thank you all for that.
I'll take the first one. Thank you so much for posing that first question. And so, sitting here from the perspective of with an obligation to serve load, whether it's existing load or preparing for the growth that is coming, impacted by the resource adequacy decisions and rules and metrics that are put into place in the RTO. Hoosier Energy is currently a member of MISO and PJM, but most of our load is in MISO. And so we're also going through this energy transition. So about 5 years ago, we looked at our portfolio and said, the best risk-based approach to take is to have a more diverse resource mix for whatever that future is going to be. And so through the steps that we've taken, we've reduced our carbon footprint from 2005, to 2022 by nearly 40%. With the actions that we're taking coming up, we're going to transition that an additional 48% reduction. So we're part of this transition of the existing mix as well. But we did that all through the lens of resource adequacy and reliability are a given, and they can't suffer. And so as we look to change our portfolio, we're looking at those types of resources that have the same characteristics as always available dispatchable generation. And that includes in our participation in the restart of the Palisades nuclear facility, which we're very excited about, as well as it's going to take some new natural gas. And so when it comes to resource adequacy from the state level, I've also been fortunate to serve on the state's 21st Century Energy Policy Development Task Force, and we covered these very types of risk and issues that we're talking about. And the state set forth a policy that says when we make decisions from a regulatory standpoint, we need to look at our electricity supply, and we need to look at it through a lens that includes reliability, resiliency, stability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. All of those collectively and not just independently in order to make sure that we do have resource adequacy. And one of the things that the state put into place, in addition to what the RTOs do from a accreditation standpoint, is to say that for our utilities in the state of Indiana, we don't want you to rely on that short-term market for any more than 15% of your requirements. So they want us to have assets in the ground, or they want us to be able to point through contracts to specific assets. And so I think that that's one of the things that's at issue in some of the markets, is that there's this reliance on the market, but the market may not have supply if utilities and generators haven't built the new generation to be there. And these are issues that we're dealing with today, even before we try to grow to accommodate all the data center load that's coming. And we're excited about that, but the consumers of electric co-ops, who we serve more than 90% of the persistent poverty counties in the United States, have to be able to afford that electricity. So I think it has to be a very balanced discussion around affordability and resource adequacy together. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosner, I would just add, I completely concur in terms of the dynamic now where load growth is incredibly tied to economic growth, and the converse also, which is if we're not able to support the load growth, we're concerned about the implications for economic growth, for our industry, for our customers, for all that rely on the digital infrastructure. From our perspective, confidence in forecasting is essential to all stakeholders, and it's an area where we very much see the opportunity to lean in as an industry, but also the imperative to try and hone and get that right. There's a lot of uncertainty now. I mean, we can't use the same types of methodologies we used during 2 decades of relatively level load forecast. Now that we're seeing this increase in load forecasts, and folks are trying to figure out, what does it mean? What's real? What's not real? McKinsey tells us about 30 to 40% of the load growth between now and 2030 is going to be data center load growth, where you're also seeing load growth from onshore manufacturing, electrification of vehicles and buildings, indoor agriculture, which is now being targeted in certain states, and a variety of other things that are all equivalent to that growth. So from our perspective, it is a matter of increased communication and collaboration among stakeholders, and that's us, that's utilities, it's grid operators, it's regulators. It's trying to explain what our industry does, the trends that we're seeing, why we are building. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, or Census Bureau, tells us that the data center build went from $16 billion last May to $27 billion nationally this May. And everybody's trying to figure out, what does that mean? I mean, it's concrete in the ground. It's real from our perspective. And I think the more we can talk about how we're seeing those load needs manifest as more customer demand comes through, the better I think all can be served. So from our perspective, it really is trying to minimize over forecasting. We are large ratepayers as well, and we want to make sure that the grid's right sized and investments are right sized. But we've also seen firsthand the effects of maybe miscasting load growth and facilities that aren't energized when they were supposed to be, and trying to figure out how we can get that synced up is going to be incredibly important. So I do think it's more communication, and from that perspective, we're all in.
Yeah, and I'll just speak for the CAISO. So we've made a lot of progress since 2020, and as I mentioned before, our planning processes in California are very tightly connected to our California state energy agencies. So those processes have been playing out over the past few years. I will note that the California Public Utilities Commission did order a significant amount of new procurement between 2019 and 2021. So that amounted to 18.8 gigawatts of new effective capacity, all clean capacity. We are currently seeing the product of that procurement. Local regulatory authorities are also building out a significant amount of new clean generation to meet state goals, but also our reliability needs out into the future as we are experiencing load growth as well. So I think that high degree of coordination has really helped to bring these new resources online. To do that going forward, though, I think harkening back to the theme from the beginning of this panel is that the Commission does play a role in that as well, and so making sure that we can continue to keep that pace going forward. The interconnection process enhancements that were recently approved are going to be extremely helpful in order for us to keep up that pace to bring on new generation. There is a lot of coordination kind of outside of the planning processes as well to be able to facilitate the development of new resources in California. So we work a lot behind the scenes with the state energy agencies and with industry, with load serving entities, with utilities, to make sure that we can best alleviate the barriers to getting new resources online. This is outside of just interconnection and transmission, but permitting. It's really led us to review a lot of the rules that have been placed in the state to really facilitate this energy transition. So I would say that collaboration has really helped to really keep up the pace of getting new generation online that is needed to meet reliability, and these have been clean assets. So we have now 10 gigawatts or over 10 gigawatts of grid-scale battery storage on the system. That has really helped us to meet in California, which is our most challenging period, that net peak period after the sun sets.
So, Commissioner Rosner, we, like you, see this growth as a very good thing for our customers and our communities and the states that we serve. And I think we're also, because of our state regulatory construct and our proven IRP process, well positioned to meet this load growth. And I'd love to give you an example if I could. Let me answer first your question about risk. So you're right, our normal regression models of taking the historical relationship between population, GDP, and load, they're not complete now that we have these large customers that can come on in such scale and speed. So we have enhanced our load forecasting process with a robust probabilistic load forecasting methodology that looks at what's the likelihood this customer chooses our territory, what's the likelihood this customer chooses our company, will they actually reach their peak demand, will they meet their ramp, will they meet their timing, and we put all that in, and what that comes up with is actually just a portion of what's in our pipeline that I mentioned earlier makes it into our official load forecast. And so what that allows us to do is be very disciplined and measured into what we build for our customers. And so, Mr. Cristy, I think I'm going to kind of answer your question too about how are you going to do it at this scale and the speed. So in Georgia Power, in January 22, we filed an IRP. 15 months later, we saw load growth of over 6,000 megawatts in 15 months. Because all of our planners sit around the same table, that coordination, that communication is built in. And in 6 short months, along with our state commissions, we were able to develop an integrated resource plan to meet that 6,000 megawatts. And in 3 years, we're going to bring on 3,300 megawatts of new capacity, the associated fuel, and the associated transmission to meet that load growth. And we're going to do it while putting downward pressure on rates. So I think we have shown that because of our state construct and our IRP process, we're really well positioned to take advantage of this opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I think we're hearing about a lot about the importance of resiliency and response to change and to changing inputs and conditions. And I think I have kind of a bigger picture question for all of you about how we should be thinking about that, because there is that need for change and responsiveness, but there's a trade-off, right? Especially when it comes to being able to have certainty and predictability for investment that needs to take place over a longer time frame. So I'm curious, and this may be a question first for Aftab and Cristy. First, I'm thinking in terms of, changes to market design and tariff revisions that come before us as the commission. How would you like us to be thinking about the way that you all are thinking about that dynamic between needed change to make sure that things are working right and sending the right signals, and that need for predictability? But I think that's also a question for anyone else, and obviously time is short because you all are affected by some of those too. So I'd be interested in your perspectives there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Commissioner C. That's obviously we're very sensitive to ensuring that investors view the PJM market as an investable market. And even though we need to evolve and we need to deal with these rapid changes, we try to do things in a very transparent way with our stakeholders, with a lot of input, a lot of discussion, and to be as data-driven as possible in terms of why we do what we do. I think a great example is the everything that we've done. I think it's been mentioned a few times already around effective load carrying capability, accreditation of resources. It's addressed in a way that is based on data, based on historical weather, historical resource performance, and provides a very objective and logical approach to how we accredit resources in the market. And then there's aspects to the design market. As I said, we're gonna be evolving here some adjustments to our capacity market that will need to happen. But again, we try to do that with a lot of communication, a lot of transparency, and ensure that people understand that we're all in this together in terms of resource adequacy. I think generation owners or load-serving entities together don't want to be in a situation where we're not able to provide reliable service. So, I think that's an approach that we're taking. The pace of change is pretty rapid. And so I think the other aspect that we all need to get ready for is maybe the time that we've taken to do things before may not be sufficient for the challenges we have today. We're going to have to move a lot quicker. I gave that one example of some of the interconnection process reforms that we're going to try to drive pretty quickly now, which is much quicker than anything we've done before. But I think I don't want to give the impression that we're just going to do all kinds of things quickly, but where it really makes sense and we need to do things quickly, we need to do that.
Yeah, and for CAISO, so our planning processes are split between the CAISO, the Public Utilities Commission does the IRP, the Integrated Resource Planning, several years out into the future, and the California Energy Commission develops the statewide long-term demand forecast, but that forecast is used in downstream planning processes, including our transmission planning and including our the CPUC's integrated resource planning. So to the extent that there is change and volatility in the forecast, that does feed into these downstream processes. And so we've been having a lot of discussions with our counterparts about consistency and ensuring stability so that things aren't jumping around in our planning exercises as well. So that's a very hot topic at this point. But I think this whole syncing of getting resources connected to the grid to meet that state plan in California, to meet our demand needs out into the future, I think reforms like the interconnection reforms that were just approved are extremely helpful because that does provide certainty and information to the developer community about what they can expect as far as timelines to get resources online. We're also working, with the state. I think another important aspect of that is ensuring that the procurement direction comes in a sufficiently forward time frame in order for entities to take action, make sure that those timelines are sufficient to account for various risks that can happen to get resources online, but it also provides load-serving entities with certainty and stability in terms of the obligations that they have to procure out into the future. So really that long-term planning has become extremely key in the state and is something that we are always looking to sync up better with our state counterparts. Transmission is another part of that, making sure that the transmission can get online in time to connect that new generation. So I think all those pieces kind of syncing up together are going to help provide clarity in terms of development in California.
I certainly want to save time for Commissioner Chang, but maybe Andrew and Mark, if you want to briefly respond.
Thank you. I guess my only concern is accreditation. You have to also include other aspects of, beyond capacity, which is energy. Where we see problems is when everything goes out at the same time, because the weather is the same all in the same area. And so we need to also be looking at scenarios around that, look at those extreme events and how that might impact it. And that's why the effective load carrying capability, you got to put your scenarios around that as well. I think there's high value to the load, huge value for the load for the country, not just for local load development. But we're running into this problem of scarcity of fuel, essentially. Much of that is people-made. You know, we can't build anything. We can't build transmission. We can't build gas pipelines. I think that hamstrings the markets because they can't drive more gas. They can't drive more generation fuel. And so that creates this huge bottleneck in our ability to move quickly to really meet the needs of the country. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we put an exclamation point around the accreditation. We have to account for common conditions that take out substantial amount of generation at the same time, and that's why transmission is really the only mutual assistance you have at that point.
I'll be super fast, just because I think this is another area of shared responsibility between the states and the federal government on providing more investment certainty to entities that are providing these resources. There's two things. On the RTO side, if you're in an RTO, I know that we personally in my region have raised the planning reserve margin twice, I think in 3 years. That's a lot for a utility to handle when it's a 5 to 7 year process to build or acquire power. And so they need a longer term look. I mean, I know it's very hard to know with certainty what load's going to look like 10 years from now, but we probably have to figure out a way to give them a longer term outlook on what they need to build rather than telling them, okay, this year you need to carry more reserves. We need to give them maybe a 5-7 year outlook on what we think their reserve margin is going to need to be in the future. And then on the state side, I mentioned this in my written remarks, so I won't belabor it, but I do think for the states that do either put these in rate base or allow cost recovery of a procurement of a capacity resource, we have to be really constructive in how we look at this. We need to recognize that a planning reserve margin is simply a minimum. That is a floor that a utility is required to carry. It's not necessarily the prudent amount, especially in a really volatile, changing, dynamic load circumstance. And so there's responsibility on state utility commissions to maybe view this more conservatively and allow some cushion, recognizing that a utility might need to carry more than the bare minimum that's required under resource adequacy requirements, and that perhaps cost recovery is warranted, and maybe it is prudent operation to carry a bit extra. So it's an area of shared responsibility.
So we've heard from this panel the close coordination and collaboration and really the coordinated actions between the state and the utility. And we heard, from the different ways, right? So we have Southern that can rate base, and many of the SPP utilities can rate base, and we heard from California, from Cristy, that it's closely coordinated between the ISO and the state. So maybe this first question is to you, Aftab. Like, when you hear this, it's a little bit ironic in the way, because we've spent decades creating, trying to induce or increase competition in places that don't yet have competition, right? And now we're kind of like listening to this panel, we're kind of like creating competitive markets that might simulate a bit more like what we want, better coordination. So I'm just wondering what you're thinking about this. So that's my first question. Maybe I'll just ask all the questions in case we don't have all the time. And my second question is really related to that. And this is for everyone, which is if we don't have enough information, there might be a data gap in how we understand the issue to be. So my question is very general, which is, are there data gaps? Are there things that you wish you had at your fingertips or back pocket, or tools that you need to better understand the forecast issue, the risks issue that the previous panel talked about? So that's sort of a data gap question. And then third, Donna, co-ops come close to my heart because exactly what Commissioner Cristy said, you really focus on your consumers. So I am curious, if we have time to talk about this, is what kind of considerations, what did you consider when you made the decision for the Palisade nuclear power plant? How do you think about those things? How do you evaluate those factors when you make decisions about serving this new large load or multiple large loads? So if you can talk more about that. So a little bit different questions for different folks.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Commissioner Chang, I'll just, hopefully I understood your first question right. PGM being a big multi-state RTO, we're in parts of 13 states and DC. I'll just say we're confident that markets can address this issue. Markets may need to evolve to adapt to certain situations, but markets can address it. I think our biggest challenge has been a lack of alignment in policies that we see across our region that impact, for example, accelerated retirements of resources or preference towards certain types of resources. And so we do a tremendous amount of outreach with policymakers in our states to just raise awareness about the impacts of their decisions on resource adequacy and other reliability aspects of what we do. Because as I said earlier, we're all in this together. Even though PGM is responsible for resource adequacy, really depend on states and others that have a role to play to kind of see what we see and support what we do. So I see, again, encouraging signs that I think our messaging is getting out there. I think people are engaging and want to work with us on this in our region. But again, time will tell. As we do our balance sheet analysis today, as Commissioner Cristy pointed out, we are concerned that we will have a resource adequacy issue by the end of the decade. And part of that is driven by policy. Part of it is driven by rapid load growth. I mean, you were asking a little bit about data gap. That is one of our big concerns. I think we got a good line of sight to the resource situation. Obviously, retirements is still a little bit of an uncertainty, but we feel like market pricing is sending that right signal. But load growth, data centers are so huge. Our projections are increasing every year. We refresh our data center load growth, and we need to get better short-term, I would say over the next 5 years, better line of sight of what's really coming from data center load growth, because that is probably now our biggest challenge with resource adequacy, to understand what's really coming. So we're working in our region, and one of the criteria that we're thinking of implementing is require a contractual commitment from a data center before it comes into our load forecast. Now that has pluses and minuses because you may miss some things that might come, but I think that would bring more certainty because there's so much implications on resource adequacy and how we plan the transmission system if we don't get that forecast part right.
Yes.
If I may jump to your second question, Commissioner Chang, the data gaps one is one that is, I think, very important to us. From our perspective, we will meet with the utility when we're developing a project or expanding a project. We will provide a ramp schedule and the kind of load that we will need in order to bring that project to fruition. That utility then helps that projection then helps the utility inform their forecasting. The utility may or may not make adjustments to what is requested by the end user. The utility packages all of that up and will provide that typically to an RTO, who also may or may not make adjustments based on different criteria or whatever else. And then we're looking at the aggregate forecast at the end, unclear whether individual projects are or are not included in there and to what extent there may or may not have been adjustments to individual projects. On the macro level, we're seeing third-party projections really accelerate. There's a gap between what some of the utility projections or even the RTO projections emerging are and what you might see from some of the third-party projections that are also emerging. And we can't explain the gap. We can't speak to the gap. So I can't be more specific than saying some kind of feedback loop, some kind of dialogue and discussion. So it's not just an input from the end user and then something comes out the other end without visibility into whether that project is fully baked into the forecast. Because again, as I said, a failure to build out, and contemplate these projects results in an idle facility, and the opposite results in stranded assets, and nobody's looking for that either. So it seems like there ought to be some kind of process engineering opportunity there, and that's an area where we would strongly welcome additional dialogue.
Right.
From a data perspective, two things that come to our mind is one is the need for transparency on DER, which is distributed energy resources, and how much is there and how much is operating any given time. Some clarity with for the load serving entity there so they know what's going on. And also really from a state and regional perspectives, what do folks see as the scenarios and grid stressors that we need to be studying as part of our adequacy assessment? So we understand what are the stresses we're going to put that system through, what are we designing to, what are kind of the projects we're going to need to ensure that we get to that design basis. So clearly those stressors and risk scenarios, NERC looks at it from a macro perspective, looking at scenarios and large area scenarios, but also understanding what they are regionally too, I think is important. So we get to again, an agreed upon level of reliability.
All right, well, thank you. Maybe just speak before I talk about Palisades to the information or data kind of missing. And I think you hit it right on. I think that as we talk about it, it sounds great. There is a tremendous amount of collaboration and discussion that's taking place. But I do think we as a nation are missing an opportunity because there are so many regulations from all areas and aspects of federal, state, government, that I do think we are missing a very holistic approach of all of the drivers that are forcing us into this, what has become a resource adequacy kind of crisis in front of us. So I do think we could benefit from standing back and taking a holistic view of how all of the policies and regulations are coming together and driving what we're seeing today. So I think there's opportunities there. Thank you for your question about Palisades. So just a little bit about us, because I think it frames the way that we looked at the Palisades opportunity, is that my membership is comprised of nonprofit distribution cooperatives in the southern half of Indiana, and I have a member in southeastern Illinois. And so I don't have separate shareholders and ratepayers. Those consumer elected members actually sit on my board and they make the decisions about the resources that are going to meet their needs in the future. And we all have very long commitments. I have a commitment out to 2060 to all of my member cooperatives. They live and serve in their communities. They have lifetime commitments to their communities to make the best decisions. So I think that frames how we look at our resources in the future. One of the things that is very important to us is resource adequacy. It's the reliability. It's the, when you flip the switch, when you power up your device, you're going to have power, right? But that's a very complex system that provides that. And so as we were looking at our long-range needs, we looked at the forecast of the member system needs before all of these data centers that came about. And I might just say that if everything that we've been approached with interest in came to pass, it would quadruple my system size, right? So that's how significant it is. But even before that, we took a look and we said, what are going to be the least risk types of assets? We don't want all of our eggs in any one fuel type or any one location. That's risk management, is to diversify. And so when the opportunity presented itself through another GNT, Wolverine Power Cooperative, to maybe partner up and look at Palisades, our board looked at it from a risk standpoint of we've got this need. We know we're going to need always available energy to meet the needs of our communities, which nuclear fits that. We looked at the risk around building new generation. We've talked about if you have a decision today, it's going to take you at least 6 years to build something in the future. And that's a technology that exists today. And so we said, that's pretty far out into the future. Here's a resource that we want to participate in that could be restarted. Take advantage of investments that have already been made, infrastructure that's already there, and put that into our portfolio. So we saw it as a lower risk alternative than some of the new build construction alternatives today. We're super excited about it, and we're hopeful while this is a first in the world that maybe it won't be the last in the world that this will happen.
Great, thank you. Yes, Clay.
I'll be very quick. But you asked about the data gap, and I hope you saw in my answer about load forecasting. We take risk to our customers very seriously. They're at the center of everything we do. They're at the middle of our integrated resource planning process. And that's not the only risk we consider. We look at fuel risk. What is fuel prices going to do to our customers? We look at potential environmental regulation or legislation. We look at what demand response and distributed energy resources could do on our system. And so if there's any data out there, we're going to pull that in to get a better feel for what that risk could be to our customers. And, we're anxious to get more actual data on what the load's going to do.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Oh, it's Cristy, yes.
Just one more comment from me. So, California, we are interconnected very much with the rest of the West, and we know that a lot of our neighbors are going through the same energy transition as we are and experiencing load growth as well. So I think we do see a role for the Commission, and NERC can help to facilitate data sharing among regions as well as to, the pace of resource development, what's holding up our impeding project development, the risk of resource retirement. So I think that type of information can really help to kind of leverage or facilitate more regional planning across the West.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you want to close us out?
Okay, well, I want to first of all express thanks to everybody who came today. Some came from far away. And did a lot of work preparing for this. So thank you very much. Both panels, I think, were incredibly informational and enlightening. And I really, just speaking personally, appreciate everybody's efforts. I want to just return to, not to pick on PJM, but I think PJM is epitomizes really the reliability crisis that we're facing. In PJM, there's 13 states. Only 2 of them now are energy exporters, power exporters. So you have 11 states in PJM that are depending upon somebody else's generation for to meet load. And that just can't continue. The old story, if everybody leans on everybody else, everybody falls down. And that's where we're heading, is and Mr. Khan knows this, and Manu Asthana knows this, states in PJM are simply not building enough generation within their borders. And this is, in a way, it's sort of a national issue. It just happens to be really focused right now in PJM. But everybody's facing this. It's not just PJM. We're not building enough transmission. We're not building enough generation, and we are seeing way too much generation being shut down prematurely and too rapidly. And the numbers don't add up, and we're heading for, literally a very dark spot. So, with that, I'll move it on down the line.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, panel. This has been incredibly informative to me, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your important day-to-day duties to speak with us. A few takeaways from here, just a few. I'm sure there's more, and please write to us if we miss things. But I hear, really broad agreement that the pace of change, this mismatch between the pace of retirements and the rate that new accredited capacity can be added, is a threat, and it's a big challenge. And I also hear general consensus that it takes too long to build new resources. However, there are some great stories from the panels today. I think, California adding 10 gigawatts of storage very rapidly, Southern, you all adding 3,300 megawatts of generation very rapidly on short order. You know, and one of the things I heard there is that state coordination is very important and to unlocking rapid build. I also see the need for markets where they exist to send signals, and that's happening through a variety of different ways. Not through a market, but through an IRP. You're recovering sort of some of the same goals, which is you're looking at where the demand is, and you're meeting it with, you know, probabilistic tools to figure out how to serve that demand reliably. And markets, we've talked and spent a long time talking about how markets can meet that need too, or through hybrids of those two systems. And again, I think the goal from all of these approaches is that we want to provide an incentive to build the resources with the right attributes to maintain reliability in the right places on the grid. And these practices, you know, I have a lot of faith in them, that they are fuel neutral. That policy has served this commission well, and it can lead us to choose the least cost set of resources needed to maintain reliability. And finally, this data gap, I think, is real, and good data is imperative to making good decision making in this place, because there's real dollars at stake here, and affordability is top of mind. So I would just say thank you once again. If there are actions that the Commission can take, please tell us, particularly if you can come to consensus with your fellow stakeholders. That's always a very positive thing. And if there are actions that the Commission should not take, that's also worth telling us about. But again, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be with you today, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Well, there's not much to add from what my colleagues have said. Thank you all, and thank you members of this panel and the panel before. Thank you for helping us to understand and shine a light with more precision on the urgency of the issues in front of us and some of the solutions you all are pursuing and more things that we need to do. There's a lot of work to do, so there's a lot of work for us to do and for you all, both separately and together. So we need to get out there and do it. Thank you all.
Yes, just one last word. I think I'll end by saying the same thing I started, which is we all want reliable service, and I can see the commitment in this room and on the different panels representing your own industry, organization, and companies. So I'm very optimistic, actually, that we will find the solutions to going forward, because we all want this thing. We're kind of like solving the problem together, and I learned a lot. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you for our YouTube audience as well. We just cracked 2,000 subscribers, so like and subscribe, keep that up. That's terrific. And please file comments in AD 2410. Thank you all very much. We're closed.